The sun bore down mercilessly as the locomotive screeched to a halt at Whispering Creek's dusty depot, belching steam into the parched Arizona air of 1875. Patience Ainsworth clutched her handkerchief tighter, dabbing at the perspiration beading along her forehead as she peered anxiously through the train window. Not a single soul waited on the platform for her arrival, despite the letter she'd sent weeks prior announcing her coming. The crushing realization that no one had come settled heavily on her shoulders. With trembling hands, Patience gathered her modest belongings, a worn leather satchel containing all that remained of her previous life in Boston. The porter had already deposited her trunk onto the wooden platform, and as the last passenger to disembark, Patience found herself utterly alone as the train let out another piercing whistle. "Was someone supposed to meet you, miss?" the station attendant asked, glancing at his pocket watch. He was an older gentleman with gray whiskers and kind eyes that reflected pity. "My uncle, Benjamin Ainsworth," Patience replied, her voice catching. "He owns a ranch somewhere near town. Perhaps he's been delayed." The attendant shook his head. "Been at this station 15 years, miss." "Don't recall any Benjamin Ainsworth hereabouts." The blood drained from Patience's face. She had traveled over 2,000 miles on the promise of family and a fresh start after her parents' death. Now she stood in a strange town with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. As the other passengers disappeared into waiting carriages or the arms of loved ones, Patience remained fixed in place. Her elegant traveling dress, the last vestige of her former life, already coated with a fine layer of frontier dust. The station attendant disappeared into his small office, leaving her alone with the afternoon sun beating down upon her fair skin. "Seems you've been left high and dry," a deep voice remarked from behind her. Patience turned to find a man leaning against a post, observing her with piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. He wasn't particularly tall, but his presence commanded attention. His face was tanned from years under the sun, with the beginnings of crow's feet at the corners of his eyes. A neatly trimmed beard framed a strong jawline, and his clothing, though dusty, spoke of a man who took pride in his appearance despite the harshness of frontier life. "Isaac Fletcher," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Couldn't help noticing your predicament." Patience straightened her posture, remembering her mother's lessons on propriety. "Patience Ainsworth, I was expecting my uncle, but it seems he's not here." The cowboy's gaze moved to her trunk, then back to her face. There was no mockery in his expression, just a contemplative assessment. "You got anywhere to go, Miss Ainsworth? I'll find accommodation in town," she answered, though her voice lacked conviction. The meager funds sewn into her corset would barely last a week. Isaac seemed to weigh something in his mind before making a decision. With fluid movement, he stepped forward and hefted her trunk with surprising ease. "My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from here," he said, loading the trunk onto a wagon Patience hadn't noticed before. "I've got business to finish in town, but I'll be heading back before sunset." He paused, studying her face. "Ride with me, I know most folks around these parts. If your uncle exists, we'll find him. If not, you can stay at my place until you figure out your next move." Patience hesitated, her mother's warnings about strange men echoing in her mind. But as she glanced around at the nearly deserted platform, the emptiness of her prospects struck her with stark clarity. "I don't make a habit of accepting rides from men I don't know, Mr. Fletcher," she said, summoning what dignity she could. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "Out here, Miss Ainsworth, you'll find that strangers are just friends you haven't met yet. And sometimes they're the only ones who'll help when you need it most." Something in his straightforward manner disarmed her. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was the honest look in his eyes, but Patience found herself nodding. "I would be most grateful for your assistance, Mr. Fletcher." Isaac offered his hand to help her onto the wagon bench. "Call me Isaac, formality doesn't survive long in the territories." As Patience settled onto the wooden seat, she noticed his hands strong and calloused from work, yet unexpectedly gentle as he arranged a folded blanket to make her more comfortable. "I have some business at the general store," he said, climbing up beside her. Then we can start looking for your uncle. Patience watched as he took the reins, his movements practiced and efficient. Thank you, she said softly. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. Isaac clicked his tongue, urging the horses forward. Everyone needs a helping hand sometimes, Miss Ainsworth, even in the Wild West. As the wagon pulled away from the station, Patience couldn't help but feel that whatever twist of fate had brought her to this moment abandoned at a dusty depot with no family to claim her, perhaps it wasn't entirely cruel after all. Whispering Creek was smaller than Patience had imagined. A single dirt main street lined with wooden buildings comprised the entirety of the town. Men in dusty clothing lounged outside the saloon, eyeing her with curious glances as Isaac's wagon rolled past. Women in practical frontier dresses carried parcels from the general store, their gazes lingering on the unfamiliar face beside the familiar rancher. Not much to look at, I know, Isaac commented, noting her observation, but it's got everything you need to survive out here. It's quaint, Patience offered diplomatically. Isaac's laugh was unexpected, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his weathered features. That's a polite way of saying it's a dust bowl. You're not the first Eastern lady to arrive with grand expectations, only to find the territories ain't exactly like the dime novels make them out to be. He guided the wagon to a stop in front of the general store, a two-story building with Miller's Mercantile painted in fading letters across its facade. Wait here, he said, jumping down from the wagon with an agility that belied his solid frame. Won't be but a moment. As Isaac disappeared into the store, Patience became acutely aware of the stares directed her way. Her traveling suit, though dusty from the journey, still marked her as an outsider with its Eastern cut and quality fabric. You're new, stated a female voice. Patience turned to find a woman about her age approaching the wagon. She wore a simple calico dress, her blonde hair neatly pinned beneath a practical bonnet. I'm Margaret Owens, she introduced herself with a friendly smile. School teacher. We don't get many new faces around here, especially not ladies on their own. Patience Ainsworth, she replied, grateful for the friendly overture. I've come to find my uncle, Benjamin Ainsworth. Do you happen to know him? A shadow crossed Margaret's face. Benjamin Ainsworth. Are you certain that's his name? Hope fluttered in Patience's chest. Yes, quite certain. He wrote to me after my parents passed, inviting me to join him here. Margaret hesitated, glancing toward the store as if measuring her words. Miss Ainsworth, there was a Benjamin Ainsworth who lived about 15 miles from here, had a small homestead near the creek. Patience noted the past tense with growing dread. Was. I'm afraid he passed away last winter, Margaret said gently. Pneumonia took a lot of folks during that cold spell. The news struck Patience like a physical blow. Her uncle, her last living relative and final hope, was gone. She had traveled across the continent to a place where she knew no one, had no prospects, and now no family. I see, she managed, her voice hollow. Thank you for telling me. Margaret reached up to touch her hand in sympathy. I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news. If you need anything while you're in town, my house is just behind the schoolhouse. Before Patience could respond, Isaac emerged from the store carrying several packages. His eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of Margaret beside the wagon. Miss Owens, he greeted with a polite nod. Mr. Fletcher, Margaret returned, a certain coolness entering her tone. I was just informing Miss Ainsworth about her uncle. Isaac's gaze shifted to Patience, noting her pale complexion. You found out about Benjamin then? You knew? Patience asked, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. Isaac secured his packages in the back of the wagon before answering. I suspected when you mentioned his name. Ben Ainsworth was a decent man, kept to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings. He paused, looking at her directly. I didn't want to tell you at the station, thought it better to let you have some hope until we could confirm it. The consideration behind his reasoning softened Patience's initial hurt. What am I to do now? She whispered, more to herself than to the others. Margaret spoke up. The boarding house has rooms, my offer stands, Isaac interrupted. I've got a spare room at the ranch. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. You can stay until you decide your next move." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Mr. Fletcher, while I'm sure your intentions are honorable, it hardly seems proper for an unmarried woman to my housekeeper, Mrs. Guthrie lives on the property," Isaac cut in, his tone brooking no argument. "And I've never given anyone in this town reason to question my character." The tension between them suggested a history Patience couldn't decipher. Margaret finally stepped back from the wagon. "It's your decision, Miss Ainsworth," she said. Though her expression conveyed clear disapproval, Patience weighed her options. The boarding house would drain her limited funds quickly. Isaac's offer, while unconventional, promised shelter and time to consider her future. "I accept your hospitality, Mr. Fletcher," she decided, "if it's truly no imposition." Isaac nodded once, satisfaction briefly crossing his features before his expression returned to its usual reserved state. "None at all," he turned to Margaret. "Good day, Miss Owens." As they pulled away from the store, Patience felt Margaret's eyes following them. "She seems concerned for my welfare," she observed cautiously. Isaac snorted softly. "Margaret Owens is concerned with everyone's business. She means well, but she sees the world in black and white. Out here, most things are various shades of gray." Patience studied his profile as he guided the horses toward the outskirts of town. "And where do you fall in those shades, Mr. Fletcher?" His mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Depends who you ask. To some, I'm just a hard-working rancher. To others," he shrugged, "let's just say my past isn't as pristine as Miss Owens might prefer." "Should I be concerned?" Patience asked directly. Isaac met her gaze, his blue eyes steady and clear. "No, Miss Ainsworth, whatever I've done, harming women has never been part of it." For reasons she couldn't fully articulate, Patience believed him. As the wagon left the town behind and entered the vast, open landscape of the territory, she felt an odd mixture of trepidation and anticipation. Her plans had crumbled to dust, yet here she was, heading into the unknown with a man she'd just met, a man with apparently questionable aspects to his history. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, deciding to focus on the present rather than the calamity of her situation. Isaac seemed to relax slightly at the change of topic. "It's modest compared to some, but it's mine free and clear. 300 acres, most of it good grazing land. Got about 200 head of cattle, a dozen horses. The house isn't what you're probably used to, but it's solid. Built it myself." "You built your own house?" Patience couldn't hide her surprise. "Had help with the heavy lifting, but yes. Out here, if you can't do something yourself, you learn quick or you don't survive." As they traveled, Isaac pointed out landmarks, the distant mountains, a creek that ran through his property, the remains of an abandoned stage-coach station. The landscape was unlike anything Patience had ever seen. Where Boston had been crowded and constrained, this land seemed endless, the sky a vast blue canopy stretching from horizon to horizon. "It's beautiful," she admitted in a wild sort of way. "That's exactly it," Isaac agreed, a note of passion entering his voice. "Wild but beautiful. Dangerous sometimes, but honest. The land doesn't lie to you or pretend to be something it's not." Patience thought she detected criticism of Eastern society in his words, but before she could ask, Isaac pointed toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. "There it is, Fletcher Ranch." As they drew closer, Patience could make out a substantial log house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Corrals contained horses that raised their heads at their approach. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the scene, lending it a tranquil beauty she hadn't expected. A plump woman in her 60s emerged from the house as Isaac drew the wagon to a stop in the yard. Her gray hair was neatly pinned back, and though her dress was simple, it was clean and well kept. "You're late, Mr. Fletcher," she called out, hands on her hips. "Stew's been ready this past hour." "Had reason to delay, Mrs. Guthrie," Isaac replied, jumping down from the wagon. "We've got a guest." The housekeeper's eyes widened as she took in Patience's appearance. "Land's sakes, a proper lady. What are you doing bringing her to this backwater, Mr. Fletcher?" Isaac helped Patience down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. Miss Ainsworth came looking for her uncle, Benjamin Ainsworth. Understanding dawned on Mrs. Guthrie's face. "Oh, you poor dear, come inside and get yourself settled. You must be exhausted from your journey." As Isaac carried her trunk toward the house, Patience found herself ushered inside by the motherly housekeeper. The interior of the home surprised her. Though undeniably a frontier dwelling, it was clean, well-ordered, and more comfortable than she had anticipated. Polished wooden floors, simple but sturdy furniture, and several bookshelves lined with volumes suggested its owner valued comfort and education. "The guest room's just down the hall," Mrs. Guthrie explained. "It's small, but it's got a proper bed and a washstand. Mr. Fletcher, you put that trunk in there and then wash up for supper." Isaac complied without comment, carrying Patience's belongings to the indicated room before disappearing to what she presumed was his own quarters. "He doesn't talk much, Mrs. Guthrie confided as she showed Patience to the guest room, "but he's a good man at heart. Don't let the town gossip fool you." "What gossip would that be?" Patience inquired, curious about her unexpected host. Mrs. Guthrie waved a dismissive hand. "Nothing worth repeating. People talk when they don't know the full story. Now you freshen up and come to the kitchen when you're ready. A hot meal will do you good after the day you've had." Left alone, Patience took stock of her surroundings. The room was indeed small but scrupulously clean. A patchwork quilt covered the bed, and lace curtains framed the window that looked out onto the ranch yard. On the washstand sat a pitcher of water, a basin, and a small mirror. Patience poured water into the basin and washed her face, trying to process the dramatic turn her life had taken in a single day. This morning, she had been full of nervous anticipation about reuniting with her uncle and beginning a new chapter. Now her uncle was dead, her future uncertain, and she found herself dependent on the goodwill of a stranger with kind eyes and strong hands, her mind unhelpfully supplied. Pushing the thought aside, Patience changed from her traveling dress into a simpler frock more suited to the frontier environment. After pinning her chestnut hair into a modest chignon, she made her way to the kitchen, following the enticing aroma of Mrs. Guthrie's cooking. The kitchen was warm and inviting, dominated by a large cast-iron stove and a sturdy wooden table. Isaac sat at one end, freshly washed and changed into a clean shirt, his damp hair combed back from his forehead. He rose when Patience entered, pulling out a chair for her with an unexpected courtesy. "Thank you," she murmured, taking the offered seat. Mrs. Guthrie bustled about, placing steaming bowls of beef stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches on the table. "Eat up," she encouraged. "Nothing cures troubles like a full belly." The meal passed in relative quiet, with Isaac asking a few polite questions about Patience's journey west. Mrs. Guthrie, sensing Patience's emotional exhaustion, filled the silences with gentle chatter about the ranch and its routines. Mrs. Guthrie lives in the small cabin behind the main house, Isaac explained as they finished their meal. "She's been with me since I established the ranch 5 years ago." "Do you have family nearby, Mrs. Guthrie?" Patience asked. "Lost my husband in '65 last year of the war." "My son works the silver mines down in Tucson. Comes to visit when he can," the older woman replied. "Mr. Fletcher here offered me a position when I needed it most. Been looking after him ever since." There was genuine affection in her tone, and Patience noted the way Isaac's expression softened momentarily. "Mrs. Guthrie makes it sound like charity," he said. "Truth is, I'd be lost without her keeping things in order. Can't cook worth a damn." "Language, Mr. Fletcher," the housekeeper admonished, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. After supper, Mrs. Guthrie insisted on clearing away the dishes herself, sending Isaac and Patience to the porch with cups of coffee. The night was settling in, bringing with it a profound darkness Patience had never experienced in the city. Stars emerged in breathtaking profusion across the velvet sky. "It's incredible," she breathed, gazing upward from her seat on a wooden rocking chair. Isaac leaned against the porch railing, his profile outlined by the soft light spilling from the house windows. "One of the reasons I stay," he admitted. "In the city, you forget what the sky really looks like." Patience sipped her coffee, finding comfort in its warmth. "I should discuss my plans with you," she said after a moment. "I won't impose on your hospitality for long. You're not imposing, and you don't need to have everything figured out tonight. Nevertheless, I should be practical. With my uncle gone, I have no purpose here. Perhaps I should return east." Isaac turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light. "And what's waiting for you there?" The question struck deep. "Nothing," Patience admitted after a long pause. "My parents are gone, our home sold to pay debts. I have distant acquaintances, but no one I could truly call upon for help." "Then give yourself time to consider your options," Isaac suggested. "Whispering Creek might not look like much, but it's a growing community. They need a seamstress from what I hear. The hotel's looking for help. And there's always the possibility of teaching alongside Miss Owens." Patience was touched by his effort to present possibilities. "You've only just met me, Mr. Fletcher. Why are you so willing to help?" Isaac was quiet for so long that Patience thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "When I came west, I was young and foolish, made some bad choices. Someone gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. Figure I owe the same to others." The simple statement contained volumes left unsaid, but Patience understood its essence. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the ride, the room, and the chance to catch my breath." Isaac nodded, finishing his coffee in a single swallow. "Dawn comes early on a ranch. I'll be out with the hands, but Mrs. Guthrie will see to your needs. Feel free to explore the house and immediate grounds, though I'd ask you not to wander far alone. The territory can be dangerous for those not familiar with its ways." "Of course," Patience agreed. "Good night, Mr. Fletcher. Good night, Miss Ainsworth." He paused at the door. "And welcome to Arizona territory." As Isaac disappeared into the house, Patience remained on the porch, watching the stars and contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. For the first time since receiving news of her uncle's death, she felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps here in this wild, beautiful place, she might find a purpose after all. Patience woke to unfamiliar sounds, a rooster crowing, men's voices calling to one another, the distant lowing of cattle. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the wooden floor. For a moment, disorientation gripped her until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She was in Arizona territory. Her uncle was dead, and she was staying in the home of Isaac Fletcher, a man she had known for less than a day. Rising, Patience dressed in a practical blue cotton dress, one of the few sensible garments she had brought west. After washing and pinning up her hair, she made her way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Guthrie was already busy at the stove. "Good morning, dear," the housekeeper greeted her cheerfully. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," Patience admitted. "May I help with anything?" "You can pour yourself some coffee and sit down. Breakfast will be ready shortly. The men have already eaten and gone out to work." Through the kitchen window, Patience could see several cowboys on horseback driving cattle toward distant pastures. She spotted Isaac easily, his straight posture and confident handling of his horse setting him apart. "He's a good horseman," she observed. Mrs. Guthrie followed her gaze. "One of the best. Raised horses before he started with cattle. Still breaks the wild ones himself, though I tell him he's getting too old for such foolishness." Patience accepted a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with gravy. "He can't be that old," she commented, trying to sound casual. 32 this past April," Mrs. Guthrie supplied with a knowing smile. "And before you ask, no, he's never been married. Had a sweetheart once, or so they say, but that was before my time here." Patience felt her cheeks warm. "I wasn't going to ask," she protested. "Of course not, dear." The housekeeper's tone made it clear she didn't believe it for a moment. "Now eat up. I thought you might want to see the ranch today. Mr. Fletcher said I should show you around, help you get your bearings." After breakfast, Mrs. Guthrie took Patience on a tour of the immediate property. The main house was larger than it had first appeared, with a spacious living room containing a stone fireplace, Isaac's bedroom and study on one side of the house, and 2 guest rooms and Mrs. Guthrie's daytime quarters on the other. "He built it with growth in mind," the housekeeper explained as they walked through the airy rooms. "Said a house should have room for a family, even if he wasn't sure he'd ever have one." Outside, they visited the barn where sleek horses occupied stalls, the chicken coop, the vegetative garden Mrs. Guthrie tended, and the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived. 5 men work here year-round, Mrs. Guthrie told her. More during roundup and branding. Good men, all of them. Mr. Fletcher doesn't tolerate troublemakers. By midday, Patience had a better understanding of the ranch's operations and a growing appreciation for Isaac's accomplishments. Creating such a well-ordered establishment in the wilderness was no small feat. As they returned to the house for the midday meal, Patience caught sight of Isaac riding toward them, his expression grim. He dismounted with fluid grace, handing the reins to one of his men. "Problem?" Mrs. Guthrie asked, her brow furrowing with concern. "Found tracks along the north boundary," Isaac replied, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. "Could be Apaches, could be rustlers. Either way, I don't like it." His gaze shifted to Patience. "How are you settling in, Miss Ainsworth?" "Very well, thank you," she replied, struck by how different he looked in the daylight, more commanding, somehow, with the sun highlighting the auburn tints in his beard. "Your home is impressive." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "High praise from a Boston lady, Mrs. Guthrie clucked her tongue. "You come inside and eat something before you ride out again. Can't chase rustlers on an empty stomach." Isaac obediently followed them into the house, though Patience noted the way his eyes continued to scan the horizon, alert for any sign of trouble. Over a simple lunch of cold meat, bread, and pickles, Isaac explained the situation. "Cattle rustling's been on the rise the past few months, lost 20 head in the spring. Could be local troublemakers, could be renegade Apache." "Are we in danger?" Patience asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not likely," Isaac assured her. "The ranch house is well protected, but I'm sending 2 men to patrol the boundaries tonight just to be safe." After lunch, Isaac prepared to ride out again. As Mrs. Guthrie bustled back to the kitchen, Patience followed him onto the porch. "Mr. Fletcher," she began hesitantly, "I wanted to ask about my uncle's property. If he owned land nearby, perhaps I should visit it. There might be papers or personal effects." Isaac paused in the act of putting on his hat. "Ben's place is about an hour's ride from here." "It's been abandoned since he passed. I can take you there tomorrow if you like." "I would appreciate that," Patience said, "though I don't want to be a burden on your time." Something in her tone made Isaac study her more closely. "You're worried about your situation." It wasn't a question, and Patience didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I have limited funds," she admitted. "If my uncle left anything of value, even a small plot of land I could sell, it would help me establish myself." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "I knew Ben fairly well. He wasn't wealthy, but he was prudent, might have left something worth salvaging." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "We'll ride out first thing tomorrow. For now, try not to worry. No one's going to throw you to the wolves." With that reassurance, he mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Patience to ponder the strange sense of security she felt in the presence of a man who was still essentially a stranger. The remainder of the day passed quietly. Patience helped Mrs. Guthrie with dinner preparations, finding comfort in the familiar domestic tasks. The housekeeper proved to be a treasury of information about the area and its inhabitants, sharing stories that helped Patience understand the community she had stumbled into. Whispering Creek wasn't much more than a watering hole 10 years ago, Mrs. Guthrie explained as they kneaded bread dough side by side. Then silver was discovered in the mountains to the north, and folks started settling. The mines played out pretty quick, but by then people had put down roots. Now it's mostly ranching, some farming where the water's good. And Mr. Fletcher, has he always been a rancher? Mrs. Guthrie's hands stilled momentarily. That's his story to tell if he chooses. But I will say this, he came here looking to start fresh, and he's earned the respect of most who know him. That counts for something in these parts. When the ranch hands and Isaac returned for the evening meal, Patience observed the easy camaraderie between them. Though clearly the boss, Isaac treated his men with respect, listening to their reports and opinions with genuine interest. Dinner was a lively affair, with the cowboys regaling Patience with tales of frontier life, carefully edited for her sensibilities under Mrs. Guthrie's watchful eye. Isaac spoke little, but Patience noticed how his quiet presence anchored the group, his occasional dry comments drawing appreciative chuckles from his men. After the hands retired to the bunkhouse, Isaac invited Patience to join him in the living room. A small fire warded off the desert night's chill, casting warm light across the comfortable space. "Mrs. Guthrie says you've been asking about me," he remarked without preamble, settling into a leather chair across from hers. Patience flushed. "I apologize if that seemed intrusive. I was merely trying to understand my host better." Isaac waved off her apology. "It's natural to be curious, especially when circumstances force you to trust a stranger." He studied her thoughtfully. "What would you like to know?" The directness of his question caught Patience off guard. In Boston, such forthrightness would have been considered vulgar, yet here it seemed perfectly natural. "How did you come to own this ranch?" she asked, deciding honesty was the best approach. Isaac leaned back, his expression becoming distant. "I was a cavalryman during the war. Afterward, I drifted west like a lot of men who didn't know how to be civilians anymore. Did some scouting for the army, some hunting." He paused. "Some things I'm not proud of." Patience waited, sensing there was more to the story. "Found myself in Tucson in '68, broke and heading for trouble. Met a man named William Halloran who owned this land. He was getting on in years, no children to inherit, offered me a job breaking horses, eventually made me his foreman." Isaac's voice softened. "When he died 2 years later, he left the place to me. Said I reminded him of the son he lost at Shiloh." "That was incredibly generous," Patience observed. "It was," Isaac agreed. "Took me a while to feel like I deserved it, worked twice as hard to prove to myself and others that I could make something of his gift." His eyes met hers directly. "Now you know my story. I was a lost soul who got lucky." The simplicity of his narrative touched Patience deeply. "Thank you for sharing that with me." Isaac nodded once, then changed the subject. "We'll leave for your uncle's place around 8 tomorrow. It's rough country, so wear something sturdy if you have it. And be prepared, the house has been sitting empty for months. Might not be much left worth salvaging." "I understand," Patience said, though her heart sank at the diminishing prospects for her future. As she retired to her room that night, Patience found herself thinking about Isaac Fletcher and the complexity behind his reserved exterior. He had experienced hardship and violence, yet there was a fundamental decency to him that she found increasingly compelling. In Boston, a man of his background would never have been considered suitable company for a woman of her upbringing. But Boston was thousands of miles away, and the rules of the East seemed increasingly irrelevant with each passing day. Morning brought clear skies and moderate temperatures, perfect riding weather, according to Mrs. Guthrie, who provided them with a hearty breakfast and packed provisions for their journey. Isaac waited in the yard with 2 saddled horses, his own chestnut gelding and a gentle-looking bay mare. Patience emerged from the house wearing her most practical outfit, a dark green riding skirt and jacket over a white shirtwaist, with sturdy boots borrowed from Mrs. Guthrie's younger days. "You ride?" Isaac asked, offering his hand to help her mount. "I took lessons in Boston," Patience replied, settling into the saddle with reasonable confidence. "Though I suspect eastern riding parks are quite different from your terrain." Isaac's mouth quirked in that almost smile she was beginning to recognize. "Just follow my lead and you'll be fine. Sugar here is steady as they come." They set out at an easy pace, Isaac leading the way along a well-worn trail that wound through the ranch property before heading east into more rugged country. As they rode, he pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local knowledge where to find water, which plants to avoid, signs of wildlife in the area. "Your uncle's place is just beyond that ridge," he said after they had been riding for about an hour. "It's smaller than my spread, but the land's good. Has a year-round spring feeding into a small creek." As they crested the ridge, Patience got her first view of what might have been her home. A modest cabin sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by a small corral, a shed, and what looked like the beginnings of an orchard, a dozen or so young trees in orderly rows. Beyond the immediate homestead stretched open grazing land with mountains visible in the distance. "It's lovely," she said softly, trying to imagine the life she might have had here if circumstances had been different. "Ben worked hard on this place," Isaac acknowledged as they descended toward the cabin. "Was just starting to see results when he got sick." Drawing closer, Patience could see signs of neglect: the corral gate hanging open, weeds growing around the cabin's foundation, a broken window covered with a piece of canvas. Isaac dismounted first, then helped her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Stay close," he cautioned as they approached the cabin. "Place has been empty a while, could be critters have moved in." The door creaked as Isaac pushed it open, revealing a single room that served as living area, kitchen, and bedroom combined. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows. A simple bed stood against one wall, a table and 2 chairs in the center, a cast iron stove in the corner. Shelves held a few books, cooking utensils, and personal items. Patience moved slowly through the space, touching things gently: a handmade quilt folded at the foot of the bed, a pipe left on the table as if its owner had just stepped out, a worn Bible on the bedside table. She picked up the Bible, opening it carefully to find a family record page with entries dating back generations. "This would have been nice to have," she murmured, tracing her finger over her father's name written in an unfamiliar hand. Isaac was examining a small desk in the corner. "There's a strongbox here," he called. Locked, though, Patience joined him, eyeing the metal box thoughtfully. "I don't suppose he kept a key somewhere obvious?" "Men like your uncle tended to be predictable about such things," Isaac replied. He reached up to run his hand along the top of a beam above the desk, his expression changing as his fingers encountered something. "Like this." He held up a small iron key, dust clinging to its surface. "Shall we see what Ben thought worth locking away?" Patience nodded, holding her breath as Isaac inserted the key and turned it with a rusty click. The lid swung open to reveal several folded papers, a small leather pouch, and a daguerreotype in a tarnished silver frame. Patience lifted out the image, first a family portrait showing a younger version of her father, a woman she recognized as her mother, and a third figure she assumed must be her uncle, all arranged in formal poses. "They look happy," Isaac observed, peering over her shoulder. "This must have been taken before I was born," Patience said, studying the youthful faces of her parents. "Before they moved east." Setting aside the photograph, she turned her attention to the papers. The first was the deed to the property, confirming Benjamin Ainsworth as the legal owner of 160 acres. The second was a handwritten will, dated just months before his death. "I, Benjamin Ainsworth, being of sound mind," Patience read aloud, her voice faltering as she reached the key passage. "Do hereby leave all my worldly possessions, including this homestead and all improvements thereon, to my niece, Patience Ainsworth of Boston, Massachusetts, should she choose to claim her inheritance." She looked up at Isaac, stunned. "He left it all to me." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the letter inviting you west. He must have sent it shortly before he fell ill, hoping you'd come while he was still alive." Patience continued reading. "There's more. He says if I don't arrive within 1 year of his passing, the property should be sold and the proceeds donated to the church in Whispering Creek." "When did he die, exactly?" Isaac asked. "According to this note from the doctor, January 15th of this year." Isaac calculated quickly. "Then you have until January next year to decide what to do with the property." Patience sat heavily in the desk chair, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. "I own land," she whispered, the concept almost too large to grasp. "I actually own property." Isaac opened the leather pouch, pouring its contents onto the desk. Gold coins gleamed in the dusty light, not a fortune, but a substantial sum. "Looks like about $100, he estimated. "Enough to get you started if you decide to stay and work the place. Or enough to get you back east and established somewhere, if that's what you choose." Patience stared at the coins, then at the humble cabin around her. The idea of staying, of trying to make a life here, was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. "I wouldn't know the first thing about running a homestead," she admitted. You could learn, Isaac suggested, his voice carefully neutral, or you could sell it. Land with a good water source is valuable out here. Would you be interested in buying it? Patience asked suddenly, studying his reaction. Isaac seemed surprised by the question. It would connect nicely to my north pasture, he acknowledged. But I wouldn't want you to make a hasty decision. This is your inheritance, your chance for independence. That's worth considering carefully. His refusal to take advantage of her situation increased Patience's growing respect for him. Any other man might have immediately offered to take the property off her hands, knowing she was alone and uncertain. They spent another hour examining the cabin and outbuildings, taking inventory of tools, furnishings, and supplies. Most were weathered but serviceable. The young orchard apple and peach trees primarily had survived without tending, though it would need work to thrive. We should head back, Isaac said eventually, noting the sun's position. Days are long this time of year, but I'd rather not be riding after dark. As they prepared to leave, Patience took one last look at what was now her property. Could we come back tomorrow? She asked. I'd like to clean it up a bit, maybe salvage some of my uncle's personal things. Of course, Isaac agreed readily. We could bring Mrs. Guthrie if you like. She's handy with organizing household matters. The ride back to Fletcher Ranch was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. For Patience, the day's discoveries had transformed her situation entirely. No longer destitute and dependent, she now had options, real choices about her future. As they crossed back onto Isaac's property, he broke the silence. What are you thinking about all this? Patience considered the question carefully. I'm grateful, of course, and relieved, but also overwhelmed. Yesterday I had nothing, and today I own land in Arizona territory. It doesn't seem quite real. It'll sink in, Isaac assured her, and remember, you don't have to decide everything at once. You've got time. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, arriving back at the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. One of the hands took their horses, and Mrs. Guthrie met them at the door with concern etched on her kind face. Thank goodness you're back safe, she exclaimed. We've had word from town there was trouble last night at the Mackenzie place. Rustlers took a dozen cattle and burned the barn. Isaac's expression darkened. Anyone hurt? Old Mr. Mackenzie got a knock on the head when he tried to stop them, but he'll recover, Mrs. Guthrie reported. Sheriff's forming a posse to track the thieves. Isaac turned to Patience. I need to ride into town, see what's happening. Will you be all right here with Mrs. Guthrie? Of course, she assured him. Please be careful. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. Always am. Lock the doors tonight just to be safe. After Isaac departed, Patience helped Mrs. Guthrie prepare a simple supper, sharing the news about her uncle's property as they worked. The older woman's genuine delight at Patience's good fortune was touching. That's wonderful news, dear. Benjamin Ainsworth was a good sort, kept to himself mostly, but always kind to those in need. He'd be pleased to know you came after all. I wish I'd arrived in time to meet him, Patience said wistfully. He's the only family member who seemed to want anything to do with me after my parents died. Mrs. Guthrie patted her hand sympathetically. Life has a way of closing some doors and opening others. The question is whether you're brave enough to step through the new ones. The evening passed slowly, with Patience helping Mrs. Guthrie mend linens by lamplight as they waited for Isaac's return. It was nearly 10 o'clock when they heard the sound of hoofbeats in the yard. Mrs. Guthrie peered cautiously out the window before unlocking the door. Isaac entered, looking tired but unharmed. He removed his hat and gun belt, hanging them by the door with practiced movements. Sheriffs organized a tracking party, he reported, accepting the coffee misses. Guthrie pressed into his hands. They're heading out at first light, asked me to join them. Will you go? Patience asked, noting the conflict in his expression. Isaac sighed, running a hand through his hair. Ordinarily, I would. But with these rustlers hitting so close by, I'm reluctant to leave the ranch unprotected. He glanced at her. Especially with you here. The protectiveness in his tone sent an unexpected warmth through Patience. I wouldn't want to keep you from your duty, she said carefully. Mrs. Guthrie and I will be fine for a day or two. Isaac considered this, then shook his head. I'll send 2 of my men with the posse, the rest will stay to guard the ranch. It's not just about you, though your safety is important. It's about sending a message. These rustlers need to know Fletcher Ranch isn't an easy target. The practical logic made sense, yet Patience sensed there was more to his decision than mere strategy. Something had shifted between them during their visit to her uncle's homestead, a tentative connection beginning to form that went beyond host and guest. As Mrs. Guthrie tactfully excused herself for the night, Patience found herself alone with Isaac in the lamplight of the living room. He looked different in this setting, less the commanding rancher, more the thoughtful man who had shared his personal history with her the previous evening. "Thank you for today," she said softly, "for taking me to my uncle's place, for helping me discover my inheritance. You've been extraordinarily kind to a stranger." Isaac's blue eyes met hers directly. "You're not exactly a stranger anymore, Miss Ainsworth." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, and Patience felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest, not anxiety or uncertainty, but a pleasant anticipation, as if standing at the threshold of something significant. "No," she agreed quietly, "I suppose I'm not."